Khristi Adams. Hello, how are you today?
Doing good. Sunday. Kids are quiet.
Yes.
Not my kids, sorry.
She's like,
I work at a boarding school, so.
awesome. Okay, you work at a boarding school. You are the instructor of religious studies and you are the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, so those titles, it's a few titles right now. They're going to
Right.
it's going to be compartmentalized into one in July officially. I just haven't gone
Okay.
around saying that that's until it just officially transfers over, but that new title will be Dean of Spiritual Life and Equity. So it just sort of combines all that.
That is
So,
awesome.
I'll still be teaching just like 2 courses. Oh, well,
Okay. Dean of Spiritual
Spiritual
Equity
Life and Equity.
and Equity.
So,
Dean of Spiritual Life and
sort of
Equity.
a merge of the two.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We are super excited to dive into this talk with you about your book, Parable of the Brown Girl.
Yes, I have it here.
Yes, I'm getting my copy, okay? Wow, what a beautiful, I feel like it's not often we get to really unpack these kind of concepts that we've learned growing up. And you really broke down some very simple things that have major impacts on not only like my life, but the life of a brown girl or othered girl, period, other person. But I would love for you to tell us a little bit about the book, how you came to write it. Just give us a little bit of your history.
Yeah. How I came to write the book. Well, so I mean, every setting that I've been in, as far as my career is concerned, if I've been in a setting that was a little bit more diverse, if I've been in settings where it's mostly Black kids, or later now in my career where I've been in spaces that were predominantly white, there's a group of Black girls that I'm, meeting and working with, and so that has been I feel like my individual calling to them, mainly because I always say, well, I was one growing up. So you know what I mean? So I just feel like the mentorship that I got and that I wanted and needed, I try to be. Um, so that's a very sort of like general term, but how it came about actually, I was where was I? So I was working in between. I left higher ed. So I had worked in LA for a little while at a university out there. I worked at Georgetown as a chaplain for a little while, and then was sort of in between figuring out if I was going to do PhD or whatever was next. And during that in between, I went back to New Jersey, worked at my church, but I also was working at a counseling center or a counseling center, and they hired me as sort of like a pastoral counselor, mainly because they knew I worked with kids. And I also knew the person who was the director. And so she's like, you look, we need you to come by. We have kids coming. I worked there, wound up working there for 2 years. I was only really supposed to be there like a short time. But the 2 years that I was there and the one-on-one counseling sessions that I had with these young girls, it was mainly parents, mothers, fathers bringing their daughters in between 9 years old and, they go up to maybe 24. Obviously, the mother and fathers weren't bringing them in at that point. And so the book was it's inspired by all the girls that I've met in my career, but it really started there. It really started in those one-on-one sessions in a room, in the corner of Somerset, New Jersey. It's just me and a 9-year-old girl, and all the girls were sharing. It was the only space that I had ever had that. I usually I have kids come to my apartment. I have them come to my office. I have mentoring relationships with girls, but this was a very specific intentional setting. And my life, I feel like, was changed in those one-on-ones with those girls, because I got to sit with some of them 6 months. Some of them came, some of them I was with all 2 years. And to see them every week or every other week and watch them evolve and watch them work through their issues. First off, I wasn't getting counseling when I was that age. It just, the whole sort of mental health conversation was really not as much a part of our culture in the 90s, right? But now it's like normative. So to have like a 9-year-old girl, a 13-year-old girl coming to see me, the majority of the girls did not want to come. They were, felt like they were forced in the corner. What an attitude, like, whatever, I don't want to be here, just because they don't really understand. I don't need it. But then to watch them sort of warm up, so it started there. That's where I think Parable the Brown Girl started. There was one girl in particular that I actually write about in chapter 1 of my book. I really think it started with her. Because she was, I say, 9 years old, and she was going through some things with her mother, who, whose boyfriend just got out of jail and was moved to the house, and she didn't feel like that comfortable with that, and also felt like she was being pushed to the side. And there was one moment where we were sitting, and she drew a lot whenever we talked, and so she was drawing, and she said, why would God make me a warrior when I'm really just weak? Like a 9-year-old girl said that, but she's saying it sort of matter of fact as she's like coloring, right? And I was like, I don't know, like and that would happen a lot with these girls. They would say these things, make these comments, ask these questions, existential questions that were inherently things that us as adults, I think, go through and have questions. We may not be able to articulate it, but she just said it so matter of fact. And I just remember being like, that's really profound question. And I didn't have an answer for her. I didn't want to just be like, well, you're a strong Black girl. I didn't do any of that. I just was like, let's talk about this next week, and I sat on that for like the whole week. Like I remember driving home being like, why did God make her a warrior? Why am I a warrior when I'm really just weak? What does that question mean? And then I came back to her, and when she came back, I said, you can be both. Like warriors are weak. I remember telling her that. And I wrote that in the book. And from there, though, I think she started it for me, because I would be driving home from these sessions and think to myself, I'm the only one getting this. Like, like I feel so full, being whether it's a minister or with my faith background, I hadn't left church services as full as I left these sessions with these girls. And I would be driving home feeling like so full and just journeying with them. And they went through quite a bit with that, I said, if I had ever had the opportunity, a platform to center these girls' voices, then I will do that. I would do that. I remember saying that to myself. That was 2016, I think. And at the time, I actually wound up starting a conference called the Becoming Conference before Michelle Obama's book. And I always say that because it sounds like I copied. But we started the book, and we did like a 1-day conference for Black and brown girls. And just because I realized that all these girls were coming, and sometimes I would get the girls mixed up, not because they looked alike, but because their stories, they were going through things in isolation that they felt like they were the only ones going through. And I'm like, you do realize, like, I'm talking to another age that, I went through the same thing. I realized that particularly Black women and girls have been going through these things intergenerationally for years and years. And so I said, maybe we should have a conference or do something and just have a space specifically for them. We did the Becoming Conference 2 years in a row. But then I had a publisher reach out to me actually about about writing a book, and an acquisitions editor, and we brainstormed. And I remember my pastor used to say, like, you should write a book. And I would be like, I don't even know what I would put in a book. And he was like, you write about what you know. And I was like, I know about being a Black woman. I know about being a Black girl. That's what I'll write about, and I went from there, and I pitched the book. I said, I loved the idea of Jesus's parables. He always wrote about, he didn't write them, but the stories in the Gospels were usually centered around like some sort of marginalized figure. And so I was like, what would, if these girls were in the Gospels, what would their story be? What would it be titled? And so I just put Parable of the Brown Girl. And so that's sort of how that came about.
I love that. And I love that 9-year-old girl who asked about
Warrior.
being a warrior. It's so crazy. I had a conversation like that with someone like 2 days ago.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, where I was like, oh, I was like, I'm a warrior, but like I don't have weak people around me or something like that. I said, so I'm like, whoa, mind blown. Everyone's trying to figure it out. That's so, obviously you see how these sort of conversations and how these small, and I'm always saying these micro moments become macro.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's wonderful. Woo. I'm like loving this parable, and I love the word parables too. That impactful moment. I wanted to ask you something else, but I'm gonna jump to one of my questions.
Okay, sure.
Your conversation 2, we're talking about. Chapter 2, the conversation surrounding hair.
Okay.
What is that journey like, and how does that relate to who you were and who you've become now? I know for myself, as a young woman, I've had so many different hairstyles. As a Black girl, I've had so many different hairstyles. I've had braids, weaves. I've been locking my hair for 2 years right now, and even thank you. I'm like, I got a little curl thing going on now too, so it's working out. But it's been such a journey where, even where it comes to acting or auditioning, I've had to literally think about, oh, maybe I should chop all this off, or maybe I should sew it up, get a wig cap, and then change my hair so I'm more palatable. Even though, Black girl hair is not really monolithic, like it doesn't look one way. So what was that experience like for you?
Yeah. And I always, so I'll go back and forth. So that actual title of that chapter is Parable of the Insecure Brown Girl. It's a girl who sort of, it's the extreme sort of version where it's her hair, it's her skin, and it's her body. So it's like the sort of like the threefold. And it morphed into an eating disorder, morphed into her cutting herself. I mean, it just wound up, So I did that on purpose because we do go through these three sort of, 3 different areas, and there's these different ways that we navigate it. I wanted to write and illustrate a girl who is the extreme version of how we navigate it, because we usually are sort of like, again, going back to the strong perception, it's usually like, I started my journey and it's always, very strength. This girl, hers was so deep, so deeply ingrained, sort of like the self-hatred, and in just how difficult it was for her to dig herself up out of that. I didn't have that story per se, but I thought it was interesting to tell. And then how many girls I realized, particularly Black girls, have have dealt with eating disorders or self-harm, which is not really the national narrative. You don't really see a lot of that, because I got a lot of, oh, me too's from this. And I was like, oh, I just thought it was this one girl. Anyway, so, but for me personally, I mean, I'm sure I talk about it.
Yeah.
I know. I was like, I know I write something about it in here. Going through the whole hair thing. So I just want to read that.
Yeah, please. It would be great. Yeah.
So I had, so imagine going through life having to qualify the hair that sits on top of your head. Most Black girls don't have to imagine. This is how they go through life. Melissa Harris Perry writes, Black hair might not always be that way, but within the current US context, it is such a defining aspect of the lives of Black girls and women, unquote. Many are introduced to this reality at a young age, people touching your hair without permission, questioning the change in length when they take their braids out, or grappling with what it means to have kinky hair. I had a head full of thick hair growing up. Getting my first perm was a thrilling rite of passage. I swear I was probably like 6. Finally, my hair would be straight. Only when I got older did I begin to analyze the complex issues with why straight hair was considered the social norm. I had to ask myself why my hair was not acceptable. I questioned what having straight hair meant. Um, so, so for me, it sort of started there. There was no natural hair movement in the 90s. Although there were some, R&B artists, that were, had their own styles.
Yeah.
Randy with her braids that made, braids acceptable. She never didn't have braids,
Right.
She was always sharp, always looked good.
Right.
So representation was really important to that, just like exploring different hairstyles. Nothing wrong with perms, nobody shading anybody with that. It was just it's the mentality behind having it. Like, you know what I mean? Behind like why you felt like your hair had to be straight, like there were no options. If somebody was just choosing that and just say, you know what, I want in their freedom and in their liberation, go ahead. But that wasn't the case. It was what we had to get. It was like, when are you getting your perm? Like as a kid growing up. So
right.
Again, it was six years old. I used to go to Rocky Mount, North Carolina in the summers. My parents would just drop me off, and my grandparents and my other cousins and my sibling. So it'd be all of us down there. And I got my first perm in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. Some country guy did my hair. I don't know. He had a Jerry curl. And and you're like, oh, my hair's straight. It's very similar to the scene from Malcolm X in the beginning. If anybody has seen the Malcolm X movie, the way beginning of Oxford, North Carolina. Where Malcolm Little, Denzel's character, gets his first conch, right? And they put in his hair and it's burning, and he's like, and then they take it out, wash it out, and he's like, woo,
right.
He's like, he looks back and he's like, looks white, don't it? He's like, it's straight, looks white, don't it? I love that movie. It's a great movie, but it's very similar to, sort of how it was for us in the 80s, late 80s at least.
Right.
At that time, just getting a perm, being like, woohoo. Now, part of it too was because Raleigh, North Carolina, I see. Part of it too was because, just ease, like difficult. So, but we didn't have the information and the knowledge and how to, do your hair, Black girl's hair, for real at that point. So it was just easier, quote unquote, easier to do, but your hair was breaking off, like after you get it every 8 weeks or so, it's going to be breaking off or whatever. It wasn't until later, I went to Temple University for my undergrad.
Okay.
Temple, everybody's hair, I cut all my hair off when I was at Temple.
Yeah.
But when we were in college, particularly in a diverse school like Temple and Philly,
right.
Everybody's just wrapping it up and doing whatever. And
exactly.
So that was fun. That was fun to be around. But it's a journey. It was a personal. I mean, I'm natural now, but it was very much, that wound up not even happening, me going fully natural, until I moved to LA when I was like 29, 30. So, it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey. But what I'm happy about is that girls now start so much younger.
Yeah, that's nice.
Like, wait till they're older to get to that point. People, they're hearing it now, like, your hair is beautiful, you can do what you want with it, like, here, and you can walk down a Target aisle and see a section for them. That was not the case for me growing up. There was no natural hair products or products that had my face on it or catered to me. This is all new.
Okay, so you went to Temple University. Very diverse. My cousin also went to Temple. I looked to you. Yeah, it's so cool. A lot of different types of individuals, just people interacting. Yeah. And so to go from there to where you are now, the Hill School, what is it like to be a teacher or a leader of color, per se, at an institution with, I guess an institution of privilege in that sense?
Yeah.
What is that like for you?
Yeah. I don't know what it would have been like had I gone from Temple right to the Hill. Um,
Okay.
there was a whole lot in between, obviously, but they are
Right.
obviously starkly different. Just Philly is different from Pottstown.
Right.
Um, I I
What
didn't.
would you, what would you say for, or would you have any words of advice for the women of color, the young Black men and women who are there? What would, if you were to get them in a room and speak to them, what would you say to them based on your experience prior, now,
The ones that are here at the Hill.
and maybe not there, who you maybe could have gotten your hands on before or after? Who
Oh
knows?
no, I mean, I'm always having these conversations now. So it's
Okay.
what would I say? It's more what do I say?
Okay.
I'm going to go back because I'm really grateful for my diverse experiences, diverse work experiences and school. I went from Temple University, then I went to Princeton Seminary, very different schools. At the time, Princeton Seminary had like we had a, we had a good slew of Black professors. The university was right across the street. Eddie Glaude, Cornell West, they were my professors. Like, those were good times. Melissa Harris Lacewell, who was Melissa Harris Perry now, she was Melissa Harris Lacewell. She was there at the time. I mean, we had some giants that we were able to really be in the classroom setting with in that type of institution. Um, and then I went to a church community after back to my church, church, Black community. When I was in LA, I was at a white school in Southern California. And then when I came back to the East Coast, I was at Georgetown University in DC during the Barack Obama years, nonetheless, though. I don't know what it would have been like during the Trump years. And then was home for a little while and then was here at the Hill. So you see, these are all sort of very, very different geographical contexts, institutional context. I always say to anybody that jumps different contexts, if you're going to do that, which is fine, you have to make sure that you're intact, that you remain true. It's very cliche, but you remain true to who you are, as authentic as possible, and that the environment should be adapting to you, as opposed to the opposite. Of course, I try to understand my context. When I was in Southern California, I remember getting up speaking, and I think I talked about civil rights something. I mentioned civil rights movement. I mentioned like the film Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. I mean, these kids had no clue what I was talking about. Not only because they were younger, but because Southern California, the community out there, I hate to be, it sounds bad. It's not that they're not as educated, they just are not as connected. Not everybody, but like culturally, like I remember being in DC, being at a happy hour, just at a bar with this, and there was this guy, like homeless guy, that was like, I'm reading the new Walmart CEO book. Like, you aren't going to get that in LA. Out here it's like everybody is, closer to the news, closer to DC, so anyway, so I say, stay sort of true to, you have to know who you are and be good, good with that, or else you're morphed into every environment. And one thing that I have seen the last 3 years that I somewhat appreciate, is that, is that Hill has somewhat adapted to me.
Okay.
And I don't mean that in like a cocky way. I mean,
yeah, just they're trying to.
I see it with my own eyes, you know what I mean? And it's not easy, for like them per se. But I try to bring my full self into all of these settings and these meetings or whatever it is that we do. And it's like, if I like hearing, don't change, we don't want you to change. You stay right where you at.
Yeah, please meet me over here.
Work around it.
Yeah. You know what? I can thank you so much for talking with us. Seriously. I truly appreciate your words today and all the many lessons for the larger lesson. I think the one thing I think we can all take away from this is really staying true to yourself. Come with your full self. The more you are okay with who you are, and the more you're okay with being honest and authentic to that, the more people know how to orient themselves to that as well.
Yes, the phrase,
Yeah.
you teach people how to treat you. It's a phrase I hear often.
You teach people how to treat you.
Say it when it comes to relationships, personal relationships, but it's that way when it comes to jobs. It's that way when it comes to your professional life.
Oh my gosh, you're so right. Everybody say thank you to Khristi Adams
Thank you.
for this lovely, lovely conversation.